From an early age, you've been conditioned to believe that you'll only be complete when you find your other half. Movies, songs, even family advice repeat the same sugar-coated lie, that romantic love heals all wounds. But here's the truth. No one has the courage to say, your soul will never heal in a relationship. On the contrary, it's where the cuts deepen, where forgotten wounds bleed again, where dependence disguises itself as affection. The promise of happily ever after is just an elegant prison, where you hand over your emotional keys for someone else to hold. How many times have you bent over backward, believing that if you gave more, yielded more, forgave more, you would finally be loved as you deserved? And in the end, all that's left is a feeling of emptiness, of being disposable, of always being in debt. This is the trap. As long as you seek in others what you haven't built within yourself, you'll be doomed to repeat cycles of pain. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, and teaches that thoughts and emotions shape biology. And if your mind is programmed to lack, no relationship will have the power to save you. The cruelest part is that no one tells you that relationships are often not a cure, but a mirror. The other person exposes your shadow, reveals your insecurities, and pokes at old wounds. That's why so many live in silent wars within relationships that should be a refuge. You call it love, but in practice, it's emotional survival. It's not affection, it's anesthesia. It's not encounter, it's escape. And every time you persist in this illusion, you distance yourself further from yourself, burying the possibility of true healing. You may disagree now, you may even feel angry at what you're hearing, but look honestly, how many people drown every day in toxic relationships simply because they can't stand the silence of their own company? How many accept scraps of attention because they haven't learned to nourish themselves from within? Joe Dispenza shows that it's possible to break unconscious patterns from the past and create a new future by living in the present. But this future never begins in someone else's lap. It begins when you face your own loneliness and discover that fulfillment depends on no one but you. This video won't give you fancy phrases about eternal love. It will deliver the naked, uncomfortable truth. Relationships don't heal, they only reveal. Real healing is solitary, silent, painful, and liberating. If you have the courage to walk through this door, you'll realize that when the soul rebuilds itself in solitude, every relationship ceases to be a prison and becomes a choice. But be prepared. This revelation may dismantle everything you've believed about love until now. There are times when life seems to push us toward a place where there's no more external noise. It's in this silent space that the opportunity for self-discovery through solitude arises. When we're alone, without distractions, thoughts that were previously drowned out by the hustle and bustle of the world begin to speak louder. It's in this silence that essential questions arise. What really matters to me? What are the values I won't compromise? It's curious to realize that the more we listen to our own inner voice, the less we need the opinions of others. This search recalls the teachings of Joe Dispenza, an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation. He asserts that thoughts and emotions shape biology, and when we allow ourselves to listen to ourselves, we open up space to live in the present and create a new future. Solitude, when viewed as aloneness, can be the greatest gift. It's at this moment that someone realizes that the beliefs inherited from family, school, or society may never have made sense. And suddenly, that person finds themselves facing a blank page. Without external pressures, they can choose which stories to continue carrying. Joe Dispenza argues that it's possible to break unconscious patterns from the past and activate new pathways to healing. This process begins precisely when one has the courage to be alone, without hiding behind social commitments or masks of approval. Silence, which many fear, can become the first step toward freedom. A practical example of this is setting aside a few minutes each day to simply write down everything that crosses your mind in a notebook. It's not about creating poetry or beautiful phrases, but about pouring out hidden truths onto paper. This exercise, simple at first glance, can reveal desires never before acknowledged, fears that need to be faced, and values that deserve to be cultivated. It's like opening an inner map. Joe Dispenza teaches that when you bring what was previously unconscious into consciousness, you open space for brain reprogramming. The person begins to recognize that they have the power to transform what seemed immutable. Another way to explore self-discovery is to observe small daily choices. When you're not surrounded by external voices, it's easier to see whether the food you choose was meant to please your own palate or simply to fit a pattern. Likewise, you can see whether the decision to wake up early comes from genuine discipline or fear of judgment. This awareness only arises in solitude. Joe Dispenza believes that by living in the present and cultivating new emotions, one activates healing genes and creates new realities. This means that even the most ordinary choices can become portals to transformation. Solitude, therefore, doesn't have to be a burden. It can be seen as a golden key that unlocks the door to self-knowledge. It is in this intimate space that one discovers that identity is not fixed, but moldable. And this is precisely where Joe Dispenza's philosophy shines. The idea that the mind and body are in constant dialogue, and that it is possible to reprogram this conversation to achieve well-being and autonomy. But of course, this path only begins when one accepts the challenge of silencing the world and listening to oneself. And at that very moment, a new question arises. What happens when, in addition to listening to oneself, one learns to free oneself from the external influences that have shaped one until now? Once someone learns to listen to themselves, the next step is inevitable, realizing the weight of external influences. Society has always had an invisible manual for how each person should act: study, work, get married, have children, retire, as if they all fit into the same mold. But when one experiences solitude, these rules begin to lose their luster. It's as if the veil falls and the truth emerges. Many decisions were never really ours. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, and reminds us that it is possible to break unconscious patterns from the past. When someone understands that they no longer need to carry other people's expectations, space opens up to create a new future based on the present. Imagine a person who has always sought family approval. Perhaps they chose a profession simply because it gained status or because everyone expected it. The result? A silent emptiness, a feeling that something is out of place. By stepping away from the crowd for a while, they discover that life can be guided not by the fear of disappointment, but by the desire to be authentic. Joe Dispenza argues that thoughts and emotions shape biology. This means that by shedding the mask of obedience, even the body responds with more energy and vitality. After all, there's nothing more exhausting than living trapped in roles you never chose. Freeing yourself from external influences isn't about cutting ties or becoming a hermit. It's about consciously choosing which voices deserve space within your own mind. A simple exercise is to observe which opinions weigh someone down and which bring lightness. For example, if a piece of advice makes someone feel fearful or guilty, it may not be a reliable guide. On the other hand, if it inspires courage and openness, it could be a sign of alignment. Joe Dispenza teaches that living in the present allows you to create new realities, and this only happens when you stop repeating inherited patterns and begin acting according to your own essence. There's also the invisible weight of social media. How many times does someone post a photo not because they want to share a moment, but because they need the immediate validation of likes and comments? This is a clear example of external influence shaping identity. But when you learn to be alone, you discover that the most powerful validation comes not from outside, but from within. Joe Dispenza shows in his studies on epigenetics that even genes respond to internal emotional states, such as gratitude and peace. In other words, by freeing oneself from the approval of others, one not only gains psychological autonomy, but also strengthens the health of the body. The most fascinating thing is that, by letting go of the weight of external expectations, a previously unknown inner space emerges. It's like opening the windows of a stuffy room and feeling the fresh breeze blow in. In this healthy emptiness, the freedom to choose who you want to be is born. And here lies the bridge to something even more powerful. If external influences have shaped the mind for so long, is it possible to reorganize the brain itself to create new life paths? This is where neuroscience enters the scene, showing that even thoughts can reconfigure biology, paving the way for brain reprogramming. It is at this moment, when a person frees themselves from external expectations, that a new possibility opens up: reprogramming their own brain. Neuroscience calls this brain plasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, creating new connections and abandoning old pathways. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who unites science, spirituality, and personal transformation, and explains that thoughts and emotions shape biology. This means that each time someone chooses a conscious thought, different from the repetitive pattern of the past, they are literally reshaping the structure of their own brain. This isn't a distant theory, it's science applied to everyday life. Consider someone who for years has mentally repeated, "I'm not good enough." This phrase, repeated over and over, has become a deep path in the brain, like a river always carving the same bed. But brain plasticity allows for a new course. When this person begins to consciously repeat phrases like, "I am capable," "I am worthy," they begin to open a new neural pathway. Joe Dispenza argues that it's possible to break unconscious patterns from the past and create a new future by living in the present. Each new mental choice is like planting a different seed, which over time replaces the old forest of limiting beliefs. A practical exercise for training brain reprogramming is guided meditation. Rather than simply relaxing, it can be used as an active tool to imagine new life scenarios. The person can visualize, in rich detail, the career they desire, restored health, and balanced relationships. The brain, unable to fully differentiate between reality and imagination, begins to fire the same neurotransmitters it would if that were already a reality. Joe Dispenza shows in his research that this process activates healing genes and reorganizes emotional patterns. It's as if the mind teaches the body a new future before it even happens. Another simple example is replacing automatic habits. Imagine someone who, upon waking, grabs their phone and starts scrolling through negative news. This behavior reinforces an anxious mental state. If instead, they spend 10 minutes writing down 3 things they're grateful for, they send the brain a new message: there are reasons to be at peace. This seemingly trivial act alters body chemistry because emotions like gratitude and love release substances that strengthen the immune system. Joe Dispenza teaches that living in this heightened state is a practical way to reprogram not only the mind, but the entire body. What's most intriguing is that the brain doesn't simply replay the past, it can anticipate the future. When someone connects with new emotions in the present, they open up space to manifest new realities. This is where science and spirituality meet. Joe Dispenza claims that by accessing states of deep meditation, one connects with the quantum field, where infinite possibilities exist. And by consciously choosing which emotions and thoughts to cultivate, one collapses these possibilities into concrete reality. But this leads us to an even deeper question. If the brain can be reprogrammed, what happens to the vibrational energy that sustains internal well-being? When a person understands they can reprogram their own brain, they discover that it's not just about thoughts, but also about the energy circulating through the body. Human beings literally vibrate at emotional frequencies. States like fear, anger, and anxiety weigh down, drain, and sicken. Emotions like love, gratitude, and peace uplift, strengthen, and expand. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation. He explains that elevated feelings not only improve mood, but also shape biology. He shows that when someone sustains positive emotions, they activate healing genes and reorganize the nervous system. In other words, the body begins to work for life, not against it. A practical example: try waking up and, before checking your phone, taking 3 deep breaths and bringing to mind something you're deeply grateful for. It can be something simple, like the smell of freshly brewed coffee or the memory of a sincere hug. This practice, maintained for a few minutes, already alters your vibrational field. You notice greater lightness, clarity, and even creativity throughout the day. Joe Dispenza teaches that thoughts and emotions shape reality, and that living in the present, focusing on elevated emotions, creates new possibilities for the future. It's like tuning a radio station. The more you adjust the frequency, the clearer the music plays. Vibrational energy isn't just a simple conversation. Physics and biology studies show that emotional states directly influence hormones and even gene expression. Low vibrational emotions, such as resentment, increase cortisol and weaken the immune system. However, the consistent practice of gratitude and love releases oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, substances linked to healing, well-being, and longevity. Joe Dispenza demonstrates in his lectures that the body is like a laboratory. Every thought and emotion is a chemical instruction sent to the cells. And when a person consciously chooses to raise their energy, they are, in effect, giving their own body healing orders. This concept can be applied to everyday situations. Imagine someone who always leaves home late, stressed, and cursing the traffic. This pattern creates a dense, energetic cloud, which attracts even more frustration. But if that same person starts the day intentionally cultivating calm and gratitude, they'll find that even small problems become easier to deal with. Joe Dispenza argues that it's in this heightened state that people can access the quantum field, a space of infinite possibilities. In other words, by changing one's internal vibration, one also changes the way the external world responds. Life seems to match the new energy. Caring for one's vibrational energy is therefore an act of personal responsibility. It's not about ignoring difficulties or pretending everything is fine, but about learning to consciously choose which emotion will sustain daily experience. Love, gratitude, and peace are like clean fuel that keep the internal engine running smoothly. And the more one learns to cultivate these states alone, the more one realizes that one doesn't depend on anyone else to feel good. This discovery paves the way for the next step on the journey: emotional independence and self-sufficiency, where the individual becomes a source of their own joy and not hostage to the approval of others. When someone learns to manage their own energy, the next step comes almost naturally, realizing they don't need anyone else to feel whole. This is the heart of emotional independence. Many spend their lives believing that happiness depends on a partner, a job, or parental approval. But when a person discovers they can generate joy, validation, and identity internally, everything changes. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, teaching that thoughts and emotions shape biology. This means that waiting for something external to feel good is like handing over the keys to your life to someone else. Imagine someone who ends a relationship and immediately feels like they've lost their footing. This happens because their emotional foundation was supported by someone else, not themselves. Emotional independence is the opposite. It's when a person knows they can suffer and feel pain, but they don't lose themselves. They still know who they are, what their values are, and what they deserve to live. Joe Dispenza argues that it's possible to break unconscious patterns from the past and create a new future by living in the present. When you let go of the idea that someone else needs to fill your inner void, true freedom emerges to choose healthy relationships, not ones based on neediness. A practical exercise to develop this self-sufficiency is to create small, daily self-care rituals. It could be cooking something healthy just for yourself, organizing your room like a personal temple, or setting aside 10 minutes to dance to your favorite music. These simple acts send a clear message to the brain: I deserve care, even if it's just from me to me. Joe Dispenza shows that by living in this state of presence, new neural pathways are created, reinforcing the idea that happiness isn't borrowed, but cultivated. It's like watering a plant daily. Strength comes from within, not from without. Emotional independence doesn't mean indifference or isolation. On the contrary, it means relating without dependence. It's being able to be with someone while simultaneously knowing that one's own identity remains intact. When one feels complete within oneself, the other ceases to be a crutch and becomes a choice. Joe Dispenza asserts that by cultivating elevated emotions, it's possible to manifest new realities. This includes attracting more conscious connections because one's inner energy becomes compatible with people who also vibrate on the same frequency of love and authenticity. It's like changing the radio station. Those who tune in peacefully no longer get caught up in noise. Being emotionally self-sufficient is like having a safe harbor within yourself. No external tide is strong enough to sink that boat. Life ceases to be a desperate search for crumbs of attention and becomes a journey of abundance where sharing is a choice, not an obligation. And when a person reaches this point, a new horizon opens up. How does this independence influence future relationships? After all, being whole and alone is what allows for the building of healthier, more conscious bonds, aligned with the soul's true purpose. When someone learns to be self-sufficient, relationships cease to be a refuge from loneliness and become conscious choices. This is the true turning point, the ability to transform future relationships through emotional independence. People no longer enter into a relationship to fill in gaps, but to share abundance. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, and teaches that thoughts and emotions shape biology. This means that by cultivating self-love, the vibrational frequency changes, and consequently, the connections that emerge also change. It's almost mathematical. Those who vibrate neediness attract control, but those who vibrate fulfillment attract partnership. A clear example: think of someone who previously accepted emotional crumbs for fear of being alone. Now, upon discovering their own completeness, this same person looks back at old relationships and realizes, this doesn't serve me anymore. Suddenly, shallow conversations seem tiresome, and manipulation games become obvious. This natural filter emerges because the brain has been reprogrammed to recognize new patterns. Joe Dispenza argues that it's possible to break unconscious habits from the past and create a new future by living in the present. Relationships, then, cease to be based on survival and become fertile ground for mutual growth. Transformation also occurs on a practical level. A self-sufficient person learns to say no without guilt, to set clear boundaries, and to express needs maturely. This doesn't distance connections. On the contrary, it attracts people who respect and value these boundaries. Joe Dispenza shows that by experiencing heightened emotional states, the body and mind align with healthier realities. Thus, instead of repeating cycles of pain, the individual begins to build relationships based on energetic affinity and authenticity. It's not about seeking someone who completes, but rather someone who walks alongside. The most fascinating thing is that this change doesn't require forced effort. When internal energy is balanced, life itself takes care of pushing away those who don't resonate with this frequency. Superficial friendships dissolve naturally. Toxic relationships lose their strength, and new connections emerge almost as coincidences, which are actually synchronicities. Joe Dispenza claims that by accessing the quantum field through aligned thoughts and emotions, one attracts compatible experiences. Thus, future relationships cease to be random choices and become conscious manifestations of one's internal state. Transforming future relationships, therefore, isn't about learning seduction techniques or social strategies, but about transforming yourself. The more someone vibrates with love, gratitude, and peace, the more they find people who reflect these same qualities. And when two whole people find each other, the relationship becomes a space for expansion, not imprisonment. But there's one detail that needs to be understood. Being alone and being in solitude are not the same thing. And it's in this subtle difference that many confuse independence with isolation, which opens the door to the next point on this journey. Many people confuse the terms and believe that being alone is synonymous with suffering. But there is a crucial difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is absence, the emptiness that hurts, the echo of what is missing. Solitude, on the other hand, is presence, a conscious choice, a fertile space for inner growth. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, and shows that living in the present allows us to create new realities. Solitude is exactly that, an active decision to delve within oneself to discover new inner worlds. It is not neediness, it is power. Think of someone who goes out to dinner alone. If this person is loneliness, every table occupied by couples and friends becomes a reminder of what they believe they lack. But if they are lonely, the same dinner becomes a celebration. The taste of the food, the silent observation of the environment, the simple pleasure of being alone. Joe Dispenza explains that thoughts and emotions shape biology. In other words, how an experience is interpreted determines how the body reacts. While loneliness causes tightness and sadness, solitude generates peace and even strengthens the immune system. Solitude is not the absence of relationships, but the presence of self. It's when a person realizes they don't need to fill the silence with noise or get lost in distractions. In this space, the brain finds conditions to reorganize itself. New neural connections are formed, opening the way for a more conscious life. Joe Dispenza argues that it's possible to break unconscious patterns from the past and create a new future. Being alone, in this sense, isn't a punishment, but an opportunity to write new stories without the interference of external voices. A practical exercise is to set aside at least one moment a week to practice intentional solitude. This could be a walk without headphones, simply observing your breath and the environment. It could be preparing a meal calmly, appreciating each step. These simple experiences become portals for reconnecting with one's essence. Joe Dispenza teaches that by cultivating elevated emotions like gratitude and peace, we access the quantum field, where infinite possibilities are available. This means that by choosing solitude, one opens space to manifest realities more aligned with one's desires. The key is understanding that solitude is freedom, while loneliness is imprisonment. The former expands, the latter compresses. The former nourishes, the latter drains. And when someone learns to transform moments of solitude into solitude, they discover they were never truly empty, just poorly accompanied by their own thoughts. But if solitude is a state of expansion, how can we sustain it in daily practice? The answer lies in cultivating exercises that keep the mind and heart aligned, such as meditation, gratitude, and detachment from external validation. So far, the journey has shown that solitude is not a punishment, but fertile ground for self-discovery. But the question arises, how can we maintain this state in practice? One of the most powerful tools is meditation, not the complicated kind, full of rigid rules, but the simple act of sitting in silence, closing your eyes, and observing your breath. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, demonstrating that meditation can reorganize neural patterns and access the quantum field. In other words, when someone practices for a few minutes a day, they literally teach their brain to stop repeating old stories and create space for new realities. Another essential practice is cultivating gratitude. And not just the superficial kind of gratitude repeated like a mantra without feeling it, but an embodied gratitude that truly warms the heart. Joe Dispenza explains that elevated feelings such as love and gratitude shape biology and activate healing genes. A simple exercise. Before bed, write down 3 things you're grateful for that day. These could be details like a stranger's smile, the taste of a cup of coffee, or even a few minutes of uninterrupted silence. This habit creates new neural connections and helps the body enter a state of deep peace. It's also important to learn to avoid the immediate search for external validation. This means observing how many times a day your hand automatically reaches for your phone, searching for likes, messages, or replies. This compulsion fuels emotional dependence. A practical exercise is to set aside a period of time each day without social media and notice how your body reacts. It may be uncomfortable at first, but gradually a sense of freedom emerges. Joe Dispenza shows that living in the present is key to creating new realities. By letting go of the need for approval, one begins to build a more authentic and independent identity. Small rituals also help strengthen solitude. Lighting a candle before meditating, making tea while reflecting on the day, or even organizing your room as if it were a personal temple. These simple gestures have a powerful symbolic effect. They signal to the brain that the moment is sacred. Joe Dispenza argues that the brain responds to symbols and emotions, and that these everyday details help solidify new mental patterns. Thus, solitude ceases to be a distant concept and becomes an experience incorporated into daily routine. These practices, when cultivated consistently, transform solitude into a permanent state of presence and inner strength. The person stops fearing silence and begins to seek it as a source of nourishment. And the more they learn to live this way, the more they realize they don't need to chase the world to feel complete. The world begins to respond to the new frequency they sustain. Joe Dispenza teaches that thoughts and emotions shape reality, and that by consciously choosing what to feel, we manifest new experiences. And it is precisely here that the thread connects with the next revelation. If the soul will never heal in a relationship, where does the key to transformation really lie? Now that you've come this far, you need to ask yourself, will you continue to believe the comforting lie that someone will save you, or will you finally take on the brutal responsibility of healing yourself? The answer may hurt, but it determines whether your life will be a repetition of emotional failures or a rebirth. Joe Dispenza is an author, speaker, and researcher who combines science, spirituality, and personal transformation, proving that thoughts and emotions shape biology. This means that no one outside of you has the power to change your story. Only you. How many more times will you accept crumbs of affection? How many more times will you use love as an anesthetic to escape yourself? Every time you outsource your healing, you hand over control of your peace to someone else. But when you learn to generate joy, validation, and identity from the inside out, you discover you don't need emotional crutches. You become whole, and relationships cease to be a prison and become a choice. This is the final provocation. What if everything you call love was nothing more than a fear of being alone? What if the need disguised as romance was actually what kept you tied to people who never knew how to love you? Look back and see the patterns. They say more about you than about the other person. The emptiness you feel isn't a punishment, it's a calling. So I ask you, are you ready to break this cycle? Are you willing to embrace silence, solitude, the daily practice of reprogramming your mind and cultivating elevated emotional states that no one can steal from you? If the answer is yes, now is the time to turn the key. If you want to continue receiving this kind of raw and transformative truth, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. But don't just watch. Write in the comments what wound you decided to face today. Because sometimes the first step to healing is simply having the courage to admit that it still hurts.